All right, good afternoon, everyone that's on the call. Welcome to today's tag meeting. I'm gonna wait for a couple minutes, see if we get more folks to join up. Thanks. All right, for those of you who just joined, we're just waiting to see if we get some more folks to join so we can get to quorum and officially start the meeting. But thanks everyone for joining so far.
Right now, we're sitting at about 5.
Yeah, thanks. All right, see a couple more people might have popped on, but I think we're still at like 6 or something. Brandon.
Going through it right now. Yep. There we go. Yeah, I'm still count 6.
Okay. So let's hang on a couple more minutes. I don't, Brandon, did you get many people indicating they would not be able to show up for today's meeting?
Actually, I got a significant amount saying they would be able to make it. I only got
Okay,
1 or 2, maybe 3 that said they would not be able to make it.
got it. All right. All right.
Zindu was a tentative, so he might not make it. Kevin, I know, is out of town, and so is Those were the three that I was pretty confident weren't going to make it.
We need, yeah, maybe two more folks to show up. Um, I see that Stephen and David are both here. I guess one of the remaining items that we had from our the previous meeting's review of the UPC Go Change proposals. There's a couple proposals we tabled, or the tag voted to table to get some more feedback or clarification um, from the proponents for those. So I checked in with Eric Vandermeer for one of the proposals, and then Stephen and Dave are here today to help with that. You may need to reiterate, but it might be good to take a look at those while we're waiting for additional tag members to show up to officially start through the agenda. So Stephen, I don't know if you'd be willing to do that, so at least we can just kind of go through those couple of proposals and at least kind of get that conversation going.
Sure.
All right. So I think the meeting information had the four that we had tabled. And so I think the first one, or I guess you might want to talk about these together, are GP2018 and GP2019.
Yeah, in a lot of ways they are kind of meant to live. Well, they're intended to kind of look at two different issues, but they're interrelated. I'll agree with that. So I guess where do you want to start, or what questions do you have, or how do you want to go about this?
Yeah, and some of the other folks on the call can probably supplement this, but my understanding was it was maybe um, more with GP 2019. Look at that one. There's some just wanting to understand how this might um, potentially allow for projects to have a smaller than needed size of piping, or like how is the determination for the runtime and uh, the cycling of the sump pumps determined with the proposal? And
Gotcha.
you know,
So the 180 seconds is basically based on the 10 starts per hour, assuming lead leg, excuse me, lead leg pump operation. That's per pretty much every manufacturer out there for 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off kind of operation. That's where the number is coming from. This is really kind of building a little bit towards the sump pump setup. So going back to the other proposal for a moment, we were proposing to basically expand the intermittent fixture table. So this is the table that allows for a lower DFU loading based on fixtures that operate in an intermittent manner. For example, something like a hub drain that's receiving, sprinkler testing water or blowdown water. There's high flow very infrequently. In fact, in the case of like a sprinkler, in theory, that drain operates 1 day a year for a couple of minutes. And so if we had to plan for a loading that might be, based on a 2 DFUs per GPM, and we're assuming a 250 GPM, sprinkler loading, I'm eating up 500 DFUs of capacity in a pipe for something that literally never runs. With the other proposal, talking about the sump pumps, this is basically a similar thought process that I'm trying to talk about for the, I guess it's -019 that you've got there. The intent of that is looking at, right now in the code, it explicitly says that some pumps and things fall under a continuous flow kind of arrangement and have to be sized for a 2 DFU per GPM loading. But I mean, by any definition, a sump pump that is cycling is not truly a continuous flow. It is an intermittent flow. Pick a dictionary. You'll find that, something that starts and stops at intervals is the definition of intermittent. With these, a lot of times these pumps are having to be sized and designed for worst case flows that are different than a standard day-to-day operation. So, for example, in a high-rise condition, let's say we've got a below-grade parking garage, we're going to have sump pumps that are designed to operate to be able to handle, again, say a sprinkler flow that can't go up by gravity. And so we've sized pumps at, say, a pair of 125 GPM. Well, the average flow for the system might actually only be 5 or 10 GPM on the daily, because you're talking about, wash down water, maybe a couple of small fixtures, maybe there's a mop sink down there. And so what you've got is a system that's operating this pump. It's designed to be able to, do 125 GPM, potentially 250 if you had to run both at the same time for some sort of a, full on sprinkler flow. But because of that, these pumps are operating for 3 minutes every half hour or 45 minutes. And so again, we're looking at in a 2 GPM per, or 2 DFU per GPM, excuse me, you're looking at eating up, 500 DFUs of capacity, basically, the vast majority of a 6-inch pipe for something that is, very unlikely to be coincident with other flows, or it's going to be very infrequent. And so we're trying to create a little bit more flexibility by allowing that sort of situation to kick from continuous flow into the intermittent table. The piping would still be sized for that, demand flow. If I need to be able to handle 500 GPM, the piping would still be sized for it. But downstream, once I'm connecting to a whole building system, we're not trying to carry through a massive phantom load.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. And I guess, Brandon, one clarification. I had it on my notes from last meeting that the one we're looking at, GP2018, the tag did move to recommend advancing it to Sierra 102. Is that correct?
Ben, that's what I had too. This is Steve Simpson. Sorry to interrupt.
Yep. Thanks, Steve.
No, I was going to bring that up after you finish. I didn't want to interrupt. That one, for some reason, I misread it in the notes. That one actually 018 was approved for adoption. It was just 019.
Yeah. So, and I think that's where what Stephen was kind of going through. So I don't know if you want to flip over to that one so we can have it up on the screen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a couple of questions. Well, I have a couple of comments and then a couple of questions. So I guess my concern is we're pumps and sump ejectors. When you say the word ejector in the plumbing code, you're talking about solid waste, right? We're talking about toilets connected there too. And I think the concern is that if we do this 180 seconds, we may undersize a sanitary drain line, and I think there is a reason for the 2 fixture unit equal to a gallon per minute when you're talking about water closets connected to it. Now, if Stephen wanted it for clear water, and that was really what the driving force of this was. And by the way, Stephen, I think your work on the other one was really great. I think backflow preventers are really need the gallons per minute, so thank you for doing the work on that. So I appreciate that. This one I'm having a little tough time because of the word ejectors. That once again, that automatically puts you into, we're moving solids through that pump, and that becomes a public health safety risk in my mind. I've been a plumber, put a ton of these systems in. I agree with you on the clear water waste, but I have a problem with the ejector. Those are my comments.
Yeah, so I think that's a fair, if you don't mind me responding real quick here. I think that's a fair. I mean, where I'm gonna say 95% of the time where this has come up and is a thing, it is clear water kind of stuff. It's not toilet connection. This is typically floor drains and garage drains and, maybe mop sink kind of stuff that we're talking about where this comes into a condition. But I do understand your concern.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. And yeah, thanks, Steve, for the comment. Dave, go ahead. And yeah, feel free just to unmute and continue the conversation.
Yeah, I had a similar concern to Steve Simpson. I mean, the way it's worded, the 180 seconds is pretty typical for any, standard lift station cycle time. So, it doesn't really distinguish between clear water and solid waste. But aside from that, it doesn't really touch on the inflow rate. I mean, you could have a pump cycle on for up to 3 minutes and then shut down for 10 seconds and then come on for another 3 minutes the way this is worded. So, depending, it doesn't really account for what could be going into the sump and how often that cycle runs, even though the cycle period might be 180 seconds. It doesn't talk about the downtime, in between cycles. So I think I don't know, I kind of like the 2 DFU per GPM for a standard ejector. And then if we wanted to change this to somehow, relate to emergency use or, kind of define what infrequent is in a better way, I think that would be more appropriate.
All right, thanks, Dave. And I don't know, Stephen, if you had any thoughts on like how you might want to, you got any preference on if you wanted to propose like an edit to it or um, potentially leave it as is, or I don't know if other folks had any thoughts on what might make it a little bit more digestible.
Yeah, I was kind of waiting to see if anybody else had jump in on that one. I mean, if there is availability, I'm happy to take a swing at maybe making some revisions to this. It seems like it would be a fairly straightforward edit to modify this recommendation to identify, pumps that are taking clear water drainage to alleviate some of the concern about the solids. And maybe I had set it up as, period of 180 seconds, but I'd have to think a bit better about how to arrange for the downtime. The 10 starts per hour really goes down to the basin sizing. It's meant for, you have this thing operating, on and off for basically equal amounts of time per kind of standard design arrangements. So in some ways that is built into the code already, as well as the manufacturer recommendations, but I could take a look at maybe a better way of phrasing that.
Yeah, Stephen, I'd recommend if you take a look at the Seattle Plumbing Code 710.5 out of the 21, there's an exception in there that kind of, I think it does what you're trying to do, but it regulates it a little better. So maybe take a look at that and see if there's changes you'd want to adopt.
Yeah, you can certainly do that. Just as a functional, for making edits, that I've ever made an edit on a code proposal before, is it's just basically update and then re-forward.
Yeah, you can send it back to the SBCC address and they'll take it in as a revised proposal.
Okay.
Yep, you can send it directly to bgrowth@ds and that will insert it in.
Excellent. I can certainly do that.
Hey Ben, do we
Sure.
have a quorum yet?
I saw Jonathan hopped on. I think we are still one short, is my
One
understanding.
short.
I was just going to clarify it's b.grote@des.wa.gov just to make sure that we are getting the whole address there.
Yes, thank you. I think I've got the emails that she'd sent me last week, so I should have it.
Steve Simpson, go ahead.
Yeah, so a quick question. It's been a long time since I've been as in your seat on the council. So how long and how many times do you allow proponents to resubmit? So they submitted in the time frame. We went through it and we're looking at it. What is the time frame for the proponent? I'm just asking for just because I want to know, and we don't have a quorum yet. Um, how many times can they send it back to the state building codes office and have it come back to the plumbing tag? I was just curious.
Yeah, Dustin can clarify. I think it's probably more related to what we need to do to keep on schedule for the rest of the process. But Dustin or Brandon, go ahead.
So I would say that we could intake a multiple number of revisions. And some of the other codes, we have as many as 3 revisions. But those revisions are, asked for by the tag. And, at some point, a reasonable person is going to say, this proposal is just not ready for this code cycle. Please bring it back next code cycle. But right now, Ben's correct that the time frame to get this all done by October 1 is really the driving factor. So, as many revisions as it takes to get us across the finish line by the week before October 1, which is next week.
Hey, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and the other course of action is that the tag could recommend having it move forward into the CR 102, knowing that there's likely some work needed to clean it up once it goes through public comment. All right. Okay, so let's see. We're still.
If you'd like, I can bring up the ones submitted by or tabled from Dave Price, and we can just talk about those.
Yeah, so let's bring up, I guess that would be GP 2012. And was one of the tag tabled at the last meeting. And Dave, you weren't there, but a lot of folks were wondering what the utility of the change would be for, in terms of it didn't, like, there wasn't a clear consensus that the backwater valve would typically be used as a clean out. So it's like, would you really need to have the same access provisions and stuff like that? Steve, you can probably.
Yeah, Dave, the whole conversation came about. There were several people that had very similar comments to it, and the concern is, with the having to have the proper clearances. I understand your plight, because I understand there's what we call bad actors, and they do really bad plumbing design, and I 100% get why you're trying to do this to give access. The discussion came around, first of all, if you're trying to put one of these inside of a kitchen cabinet, you would never be able to get the clearances you need in the clean out table. The second problem is that you already have this in the manufacturer's installation instructions, requires access to be given in order to be able to pull the flapper so you can run your snake through it, right? So manufacturers guidelines and installation instructions already say it has to be accessible. This is what the concern was, is that this is going to add such a huge, not on the commercial side of things, but on the residential side of things, this is going to add a huge cost and a huge impact to the built environment. I get, Dave, 100% why you wanted to do it, because I know what kind of horrible things you get to go look at it every day. I understand that. And I think the rest of us understood that, but this was almost a bridge too far. And I think that's where the conversation, Ben, you can kind of agree or disagree, but I'm pretty sure that's where the comments were from.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, that's thanks for the overview. I wasn't able to make the last one, so I appreciate being caught up on kind of the discussion. So most of the ones that I submitted were from jurisdictional experience. You know, we had an issue that turned into a bigger issue, and we thought, well, gosh, why don't we just try and solve this in the next code cycle? You know, I understand there it might seem too much, but the issue was, you know, basically that the code currently says where they will be accessible for inspection and repair, and you know, without any definition, then I think we had one installed like above an access panel in a ceiling or something that was up against some insulation and a joist. It was like, well, can you get the flapper out? Yeah, probably if you use a mirror and a flashlight and, you know, squeeze it out into the insulation. But does that really meet the intent of the code? So it was an attempt to try and use what's already in the code, which is the clean out clearance, and tie that to backwater valves so that we had some kind of a measurable thing that we could say, now this is code compliant, this is not. So rather than just, you know, trying to say, well, our inspectors don't believe it's code compliant, and then the homeowner says, well, I think it is, and then it's a big argument. So the point taken.
Well, and Dave, something else to think about here is maybe there's needs to be a reasonable, maybe in the clean out table, maybe something added that doesn't take you to the strict guidelines of what are in the clean out table. Make, you know, have an additional clean out requirement or a distance requirement for backwater valve. But I don't even I googled the backwater valves, and once again the manufacturers of those devices are they're extremely vague. So I don't know what you would look at. Maybe it's as far as dovetailing with the residential industry and with the commercial folks, and see if there's a number. But I think if you try to go right to the clean out, we're gonna have the same discussion. If not, you know what I mean, it's going to be the same discussion, but maybe
Yeah.
it's adding a line item in the clean out table instead of here.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Possibly, I don't know.
All right,
Yeah,
so
that's a good point. Looks like the
yeah.
the clearance doesn't really have the clean out clearance is written as in text. It's not really a table, but yeah, it could probably be an added table or something, which, you know, at that point is beyond the scope of this code cycle most likely, but we could always try again next time.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Dave. And yeah, so we'll see what the tag elects to do with this. But yeah, it sounds like, or you could potentially just indicate that you would withdraw this one in hopes of getting something into the next version.
Yeah, I think that at this point, that's probably the best option. I don't think we're gonna have enough time to go back and forth and figure something out that kind of works for everybody, knowing what the concerns are.
All right, appreciate it. And yeah, thanks. Always appreciate bringing issues like this up. Okay, so I think we're still one short, but we can look at the last tabled proposal. So Eric didn't make it, but I had a chance to review with him and just kind of go through that one. So that is GP2 020. And this is actually uh, a mirrored version of language that was proposed added to the IRC for let's see, the water heater section in M2005 and the boiler and water heater section in M2001. So this would provide some uniformity between those proposed changes on the IRC side and these for the UPC, and really providing guidance for installation of refrigerant-based hot water systems. So yeah, it seems like I definitely recommend that we try to provide some consistency, and make sure we're referencing the latest standards and practices. Steve, go ahead.
No, I'm glad you got a chance to talk to Eric. I almost tried to call him myself to get some information on this. So, in the IRC, are you specifically talking about the room construction, talk about the ventilation requirements? Are you talking about that stuff with the water heater, or actually hooking the cold water and the hot water up to it?
I mean, this would be, since I guess the refrigeration system requirements would really be,
Because these are all sealed units. There is no
correct.
open refrigerant. These are, you buy them wherever, whatever supplier you buy them from. You hook the electrical up to it, you hook the waters up to it, and it's just like a hot water heater. It's just using refrigerant as opposed to, and I understand if you're talking room requirements, but the installation of a hot water heater, even in the IRC, should say, well, the UPC governs the installation of a domestic hot water heater inside of a residence. Is that true? Because we defer to the IRC if it has to do with the building. But as far as the plumbing goes, because the plumbing is adopted per the state of Washington, is that correct? Or am I wrong there too? So I guess, Ben,
Yeah.
my question to you is, in that section of ASHRAE, because I'm not a member of ASHRAE. I've never, in the 27 years I've been in the plumbing industry, I've never opened ASHRAE. I know what it is. I do know what it is from being on the code council. And I know where the mechanical code is and what the IRC is. But what provisions do we not have in the plumbing code that are not in the manufacturer's installation instructions for me to know? Does that, I guess, does that make sense what my question is?
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, looking at the two, like the sections kind of side by side, yeah, the IRC has requirements for the room
Okay, yeah, so that it's
installation.
really about the room, right?
However, yeah, I guess this would be maybe more for situations where it would be on a commercial building potentially, and still looking at installing one of these refrigerant-based systems, where you would still want to have that guidance somewhere if the project is not using the IRC as the
Well,
governing
but
code.
the other part of it, that I have been for that is, and I get you got chapter 11 of the mechanical code, but is this a ventilation of the room component? Is this a, because it's not about the installation of the hot water heater itself. It's about the ventilation rate. So if I put this heater in a closet, I get that I have to be able to get in outside air and inside air because of the way that operates. You put them in the garage and it gives you cooling in the summer, right? That's the benefit to the heat pump water heater, really. But if you put them inside, I get we got mold, rot, and other issues potential.
Yeah,
What I need to know is, should this section be like this, or should it say room construction and ventilation requirements defer to the mechanical code and to the IRC? Would that take care of this problem? Because here's how I read it as a plumber. I open this section. Now I for 26 years, 27 years, I've opened this section. I've been able to put my hot water heater. I get it's new technology. The reality to me is, though, I put the water heater in. Now are you telling the industry that we need a plumbing permit, a mechanical permit in order to put this heater in? Do I need to pull both? I know some jurisdictions, especially in the IRC, they do a combo inspection. They inspect the whole thing all at once. That's not what happens commercially, and I don't. I guess I don't care about the. I do care about how they get inspected, but I'm trying to figure out how to wrap my mind around the fact that now every plumber in the state of Washington has to buy the ASHRAE 15.2 and have it. If it just does with the room, most plumbers don't build and construct the room.
Yeah, and I guess this could more narrowly apply to situations where there is a need to perform some sort of field piping between like a refrigerant-based outdoor unit and the indoor hot water system.
Right.
There's definitely some of those types of systems being
That have
provided,
that you're actually doing the reefer piping to the indoor and
or
outdoor.
there
Because I know
is,
there's water piping, like
right,
cold water and a hot water, but that wouldn't be covered under the mechanical code. That's still plumbing, isn't it?
correct. So yeah, so just like the refrigerant side of things for some of these types of equipment.
Aren't
Um,
they all sealed though, Ben? I mean, and
so,
I don't want to be complex.
some are split units,
No, no,
and
no.
some,
But they're split, but they're not. You cannot mess with the refrigerant inside of it. It's sealed, meaning you don't. As a plumber, if it goes bad, I take it out and I throw it away correctly, and I put a new one in. You cannot rebuild them, repair them, do anything. There's no maintenance to them. They're sealed units. It's like a throwaway, just like the rest of your hot water heaters.
yeah, and
Because like the one that City of Seattle recommends now, the CO2 one, that you cannot repair that at all. And maybe I think Dave's still on the line. He might be able to also add into that.
yeah, and I think it's really trying to react to situations where you have an increased amount of refrigerant-based technology, but where if it's just isolated to the plumbing system, you may not have um, a mechanical contractor that's going to be touching it necessarily. So I think that's what the goal is here. But Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to mention that the chapter 11 is about all about refrigeration and volumes of refrigeration and when you need ventilation and mechanical rooms and refrigeration rooms and that sort of thing. So I don't think we're talking about, unitary water heaters where it's your standard, 50-gallon water heater with a heat pump on the top of it. We're talking about component type water heaters and commercial, basically water heater farms that have outdoor condensing units and field installed refrigeration piping. So in that
Mhm.
case, chapter 11 of the IMC would be a consideration, but I think it would be helpful to, somehow list that in the proposed code language where it says maybe like component type or non-unitary water heaters or something, just to preface that section so everyone knows that when you're talking about a standard heat pump water heater you can buy at Home Depot, that's not what they're talking about here.
Yeah, and I guess that's my concern is once again, the plumbing code doesn't have a different differentiation between residential, commercial, or light commercial. It's one code that takes care of all of it.
Mhm. Shailesh, go ahead.
So this is similar to putting a refrigerator in a garage, I guess, has some sort of refrigerant inside. But this is all refrigerators are all concealed unit, On the other hand, the amount of refrigerant in a refrigerator is very limited. So if it gives some sort of exception that small amount of refrigerant, if somebody's installing, then they really don't have to worry about. And that will, unless somebody putting a big heater and a high level of quantity in a given space, and there may be a concern of leakage. So the way to deal with it is the small equipment don't have to worry about. If we think that the amount of refrigerant is not out of norm of, or any space can handle amount of leakage, whatever the amount of refrigerant is there. And in that case, the small class of heater may be exempted or can use prescriptive way of not to worry about it. But that is one way of accommodating,
Yeah,
Thank you.
and yeah, thanks, Shailesh. And yeah, I would say that most in for a lot of those unitary systems, you would not be triggering a lot of the more specialized room requirements. So that is where like you could try to spell it out here, but that would be definitely covered by the chapter 11 requirements in the mechanical code, or what's in the IRC as well, for kind of pointing to some of those requirements. Yeah, like these would really be of most use for those larger systems where you either have a larger volume of refrigerant, or you're using refrigerants that have more specialized requirements, like is in the proposed language for carbon dioxide, or if you're going with the A3 type of propane-based refrigerant. Ian, good.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Yeah, I just wanted to add, because my background's a little more on the HVAC side of things, and I think that's where the origin of this started. Going back to having like a large chiller in a mechanical room and a refrigerant leak, it displaces air, so it's a safety hazard that way. And I understand that we might be talking about even on a sealed system, they can still have a leak and cause a hazardous issue. Then when the VRF systems came on board, there was a concern about really checking every volume that you had a band coil unit in, because you could dump all the refrigerant in one space because it's circulating throughout all the rooms. So I guess, yeah, to Silas's point, maybe a small point of use type heat pump water heater that has refrigerant in it, maybe not too concerning, but some of these like central heat hot water systems that are heat pump can have quite a bit of refrigerant and still pose those risks. And I think 15.2 in ASHRAE has been a good reference to look at your refrigerant volume and look at the volume of your room and see if you have that hazard exists. So just wanted to add that background information. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, and to Steve's point though, your typical plumber is not going to be able to do or have the capacity to do the refrigerant calculation, the room calculations, or maybe they can, but it's added scope that they're not accustomed to. So if we were able to adjust the code language to very clearly accept or exempt, small refrigerant volume unitary water heaters and similar things, I think that would be helpful for just people using the plumbing code.
Gotcha. Okay, and I'll forward that on, see if Eric wants to propose a adjusted language here. Shailesh, good.
Yeah, so this accommodation can be done with respect to volume of the space and the amount of refrigerant it contains, and some prescriptive way of saying that if the volume to refrigerant ratio is certain number, then you can install, don't have to worry about. Otherwise, when it exceeds, you follow this 15.2 or chapter 11 provisions.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Give us some requirements, because right now, you're gonna have hot water tank repair people putting these in without permits, because they're not going to get a mechanical permit and a plumbing permit. And we're talking about, I represent people that get permits and go through and do the right things. I'm not suggesting we don't, but the reality is, you're going to create something that we're going to have a whole lot of discussion about what exactly this means, who can even install these systems, right? Because are you taking it out of the plumbing world, meaning an HVAC folks have to put these in now because of the refrigerant? And so I'm bringing up some questions. I don't have all the answers. I'm just asking questions specific to who is going to be able to install these, what the refrigerate limits are, to where you would need to go through that. And if that's an easy thing, if it's just a matter of, if you have refrigerant in use or in storage that has this level, then you need to also follow chapter 11 and ASHRAE 15.2. I would be totally fine with that if Eric could be Eric would look at that.
Yeah, and like chapter 11 of the mechanical code um, has kind of those exemptions for those smaller systems. So like if you're below like 6.6 pounds of refrigerant, like it'll exempt you from a lot of the requirements there. So one option could be to reiterate some of those thresholds here. So it's someone does not need to go to another code to understand that. Okay. I think this is, yeah, good feedback. All right. So we are still lacking quorum. Any other discussion on the UPC proposals? Those were the ones we had tabled. I think it sounds like Steven's going to send in a revised version of 019. Going to send Eric some feedback for 20, and then Dave has indicated that he's going to withdraw 012. And we can't take formal action because we're still out of quorum, but I guess the other item we might want to look at today is item 4 on the agenda. So this is something that we're hoping to do to make sure we're staying on track for our getting the public review period started. And that is doing the preliminary economic impact review and determining or providing some input on if there's small business impacts. So I guess Brandon or Dustin, do you want to frame kind of what you're looking for from the tag side at this point?
So for what we're doing within the work group of economic impact is we're trying to, in addition to drafting our CR 102 code change document, which is probably what most people are familiar with looking at, we also, as part of the filing that goes with that, have to produce a cost benefit analysis, or I'm sorry, a preliminary cost benefit analysis and a small business economic impact statement. So as part of the cost benefit analysis, we're trying to quantify the cost versus the benefit. And so most of the proposals that we receive indicate in the economic impact portion that there's no cost to the proposal. So that is probably question number one is that an accurate statement on the proposal? And then two is it a large cost? And then that kind of segues into the small business impacts. When we're looking at the small business economic impact statement, we want to clarify whether or not a small business attempting to comply with a code change proposal is burdened more than a large business. And so we are just trying to do some preliminary looks at that right now to take back to the work group of economic impact. The plan there at that work group is to take back some of this preliminary analysis we're asking the tags to do, and then take targeted proposals and send out some public input documents that we're hoping to get more information than we might have just with the code proposals, so that our preliminary cost benefit analysis and small business economic impact statements are a little more robust than they were in the 2021 code cycle. Just for those who might not know, into the 2021 cycle, a request was handed up to the council to repeal our rules based on the content of these reports. And the council denied the request. The Administrative Rules Review Committee did do some review. It was pretty much stated that the reports were done, But the people who are making the requests are really asking that we have more robust input on these reports. And so that's where we're kind of at right now is there cost? Is it significant for small businesses as compared to large businesses? And that's really where we're at today is trying to put some flags on some of these proposals to do that.
Gotcha. Thanks, Dustin. And I guess to hopefully avoid confusion, we'll need to do this for obviously all the codes, but the ones we have kind of in front of us now are the group one codes, so the IMC and the IFGC. So and right now we're seeing the list for the UPC changes.
Let me just set it over. 1 second.
Thanks. And so I guess my request to the tag folks would be to review the current IMC and IFGC proposals that we had recommended for adoption in our kind of last review of those, and look at whether the kind of statements with those proposals indicating that they had no added cost or cost reduction seem accurate. And then if there are any that were flagged that would add cost, or those that maybe you think would add costs even though they didn't have that on the proposal, have those kind of flagged for additional review and discussion. So we could identify if those need to have that analysis done and that small business impact survey. So yeah, here we go. Thanks. Thanks, Brandon. Steve.
Okay, so we're and not because of you, any of you, we're having quorum issues with our tag trying to get stuff done. Can you guys give us a timeline on when this needs to be done? And how quickly are we going to pull together another meeting to get the votes done to finish this report so Dustin has the ability, Dustin and his team have ability to actually produce the CR 102?
Yeah,
So
that's a good question.
So
Go for
for
it.
this one, we're trying to do some of this preliminary work at a work group of economic impact this next Monday. I believe that we're coming back and this is the first tag that's, getting this before them. The IBC and IFC tag has not had a chance to meet and won't have an opportunity to do that before next week's meeting. And so the tag chairs of those groups are looking at what we have going on there to try to come back and flag some stuff for more economic input. So, our filing goal is October 1. If we could, potentially bring this group back to meet early next week, or, I guess really anytime next week to have a discussion on the merits of the economics that are presented in the proposal documents. I think that staff can do a preliminary look and at least put out onto the spreadsheets what the proposal documents indicate, so that when we go back and look at some of this stuff, we can say yay or nay and try to flag anything that needs additional analysis. And the hard part is going to be really identifying how it impacts the small businesses and getting that information. So I don't expect the folks within this group to have a hard bead on that information. But if we can target these ones that have cost for sure, that's the first step in targeting these ones more for the economic impact as related to the small businesses. So it does this group have I mean, I know we don't have quorum, but are the folks on the call here today available for a meeting next week? Coming Monday in the afternoon, we have the work group of economic impact. IRC tag is meeting Tuesday and Thursday in the mornings. We have a Tuesday PM meeting for the single exit multiplex housing tag. That's not to say that this additional work by this tag can't occur during any of those meetings, but we're also trying to not, run overlapping meetings in case there's members or stakeholders that want to be present at any specific meeting that might overlap.
Well, Mr. Chair, and if it once again, I'd love to get the tags work done, finish the proposals, and take a look because I don't think the economic impact for the amount of proposals we have is going to take a ton of time. That could just be my several years of being on this tag. I don't think there's a ton of stuff there, and I think we can look at it pretty reasonably, pretty quick, as long as you guys can get us a quorum.
Yeah,
So
I would agree. And so, yeah, I guess I would maybe propose the same time next week if folks are available for that. But
are there any hard conflicts with other days by this group? So making sure we have the quorum is probably more important than making sure we're not stacking the meetings there. So if there's any hard conflicts with other days, I was going to suggest maybe Brandon pull the tag for a appropriate day to see if we can guarantee quorum and make sure that we get the action we need on the remaining proposals and then have some good time for the economic discussion.
Yeah, I think the only day next week I'm not available is Tuesday, and I will be um, under anesthesia, so I will not be available Tuesday of next week. Any
Okay.
other day, I'm good.
Yeah, I won't be available, unfortunately, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, but I think sending out a poll is a good idea. To try and get some, at least try and establish quorum before we schedule the meeting, that'd be great.
Okay, well let's plan on that, and then Ben and Justin, are you guys available, pretty much, AM PM all those days, or is there a day that works best for you two?
I'm available most days except for Wednesday.
Okay. Well, Brandon, let's do a poll, and then for those that are here, let's try to get the responses back by end of day Friday. That way we can post if for whatever reason Monday is the hard day that we can guarantee a quorum. And
Hey,
then
Dustin.
yes, sir.
So looking at my calendar, the only opening I have next week is Wednesday afternoon.
Okay.
I'm tied up with, or Friday.
Okay. And I guess, as far as the economics portion of it, I'd like to definitely see that wrap up next week. That way we can come back to the next work group of economic impact ready to rock with some additional stuff. But I guess let's poll, and then we'll figure it out and make sure we can work it out.
Yep,
That's
I'll
good.
send out that poll this afternoon and just look for it in your email.
All right. Thank you, Brandon and Dustin. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming to the meeting today. Sorry we couldn't achieve quorum to kind of close out some of these items, but looking forward to doing that at the next meeting.
Yep. Yes, thanks for everybody for showing up, and appreciate the time and hard work.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
All right,
Thanks,
thank you.
everyone.
Yeah, thank you.